Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Welcome to another episode of Haqiqatjou, where we discuss religion and politics, the two least controversial subjects. As always, I am your host, Daniel Haqiqatjou, and we have a great episode for you, talking about very disturbing developments in the United States and the crackdown on protests against Israel. We have been following this very closely, and it is shocking the level of overreach that the Trump administration is going to in order to crack down on pro-Palestine protesters on campuses specifically, and even beyond campuses. So we're going to talk about this issue, what it means for the war in Gaza, what it means for the Palestinians, what it means for the wider Middle East. And we're going to also look at a second story, which is the big controversy in the UK, where women, Muslim women, were banned from eating iftar. And many of these hijabis were starving. These Muslim women were starving, and these misogynist Muslim men banned them from being able to even break their fast. SubhanAllah. It's really the tragedy of our times. So we're going to look at that story later in the episode, inshallah. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, subscribe to our newsletter. You can find the link to the subscription below. And it's important for you to subscribe because that's the way that we can stay in touch with you. If for some reason social media says that no more advocating for Palestinians, no more criticizing Israel, your channel's banned, we need to be able to contact you, and the best way to do that is through email. So go ahead and subscribe to the newsletter through the link below. Subscribe to the channel, of course. And I'm going to be looking at your super chats. I want to see what you have to say as well. Periodically, we'll look at that throughout the episode, inshallah. And we'll also look at the regular chat as well if you have any comments or input on this case. So before I get into the details of this Mahmoud Khalil case, Mahmoud Khalil, if you don't know, he's the man on the thumbnail, and I believe that he's Muslim. But he is Syrian-born Palestinian who has been leading protests throughout last year on Columbia's campus. Columbia University, for those of you who don't know, is one of the Ivy League schools, a top school within the United States, and has a long history of activism going back to the Vietnam War, and just in general has been a kind of hub for anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian activism, protest, and many of their professors also are anti-Zionist and are notorious for this. They've written books about this, and this has caused a lot of backlash from Zionist forces wanting to control Columbia, which is located in New York University or New York City, if you didn't know that. They have wanted to really clamp down on Columbia specifically, by taking over administrative positions, by denying tenure to professors who have pro-Palestinian views, etc., etc. So before we get into the details of the Trump administration, basically kidnapping, you could say, arresting Mahmoud Khalil in the middle of the night, snatching him away from his pregnant wife, 8-month pregnant wife. Before we get into the details of that and the legal case that the Trump administration is trying to use to create a precedent, let's talk about this more important or broader idea of democracy and free speech and due process. This is very important because what we are seeing around the world is some parts of the Muslim world are realizing that all of these things are a farce. Democracy, secularism, freedom of speech, due process under law, all of these Western so-called values of the rule-based order, some Muslims are recognizing that this is all a farce. But unfortunately, a lot of other Muslims have not realized this. They have not seen this, recognized it, internalized it. And that's disappointing. And there was a brother who shared a post from a Palestinian. This is a Palestinian who is from Gaza, who was in Gaza after October 7th, witnessed the atrocities, witnessed the destruction of what Israel is doing, witnessed what the United States has been doing to empower Israel to commit these crimes, these atrocities against the Palestinians. And then this Palestinian brother was asked, well, what do you want to see in Palestine after the war is over? And then he's talking about elections, and we want, representation and democracy. And so after seeing all this, after witnessing the destruction, witnessing the involvement of the so-called international community with their rule-based order, enabling Israel to commit atrocity after atrocity, and you're involved in this, you still haven't been taken out of this mindset of democracy and secularism and freedom, freedom and equality. These values that are being pushed have been pushed by force for the entire world to accept and the Muslim world to accept since the Enlightenment and then the colonial period. So that's disappointing. That's shocking. Because this is an opportunity and it is a time for Muslims to wake up. For Muslims to realize that they've been duped, that they've been lied to. That this idea, these ideals are actually hollow. They are actually meaningless. They actually are a facade. They're a facade. It's a mask to cover the authoritarianism, the brutality, the genocide, the destruction of what Western powers do, what Israel does. They want to be able to brutalize you, detain you, torture you, or as they call it in the more civilized West, the advanced interrogation techniques. They don't call it torture. They call it advanced interrogation techniques. All of this language, all of this farce. Now is the time to recognize how farcical, how ridiculous, how outrageous it is to commit brutality after brutality against the Muslim world. Look at the past 24 years with the war on terror. Look at how many Muslims have been killed, millions of Muslims killed and displaced, ethnically cleansed. And you're still, and it was on what basis? On the basis of we want to spread democracy. We want to spread democracy in the Muslim world. You have these extremist Muslims who believe in the Sharia. They believe in the Khilafah. They believe in political Islam. They're Islamists. We have to snuff them out. We have to crush them, because if we don't crush them, then that's a threat to democracy. That's a threat to freedom and equality. And on that basis, they committed genocide against Muslims. We've been the primary victims of this, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, and on, Syria. It's all because of this ideal, and you still have some Muslims who are attached to this and are advocating democracy. That's a disaster, in my opinion. That is a pure disaster. And we have to get beyond this. We have to grow. Because that's what it's going to take for revival. We want a revival of Islam. We want a global revival of Islam. We want real Muslims to come, especially in the next generation, and lead the world as real Muslims, following in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, following in the footsteps of the Sahaba and the Salaf and the previous generations who were leading. They were leading not only in spirituality and morality, but also in political power and dominance. This is what every group strives for, and Muslims strive for it as well. Muslims want that as well, under the guidance of the Quran and Sunnah. That's what all Muslims want, and that's what we should be striving for. Instead, we've had a lot of sleep. Muslims sleeping, Muslims under the delusion that as long as we have representational democracy and secularism, that's the ideal. That's the best system that we can hope for. And that's the secret to the success of the West. And we need to have that kind of success as well by adopting those systems and those Western ideals. When are we going to wake up? When are we going to wake up from this sleep? And the most recent case, that's the significance of the entire war in Gaza, the entire situation of the Palestinians today, the expanding danger to the Middle East at large, as Israel is now occupying southern Syria, Israel is occupying southern Lebanon, Israel is threatening Egypt to push the Palestinians into the Sinai in Egypt, into Jordan from the West Bank. So Israel is threatening more than the Palestinians. Israel is threatening the entire Middle East. Trump is attacking and threatening the entire Middle East. So this is spiraling into a much larger situation that affects Muslims not only in the Middle East, but the entire world. So we have to address these developments, but also understand the bigger picture and the bigger goals that we have. Like, what's the point if we struggle and Muslims struggle against these kinds of threats, these existential threats, and we're left with, oh, now we have like representational democracy. We have representational democracy, and we want to make sure like women have the right to dress however they want, and we just take a Western-based secular constitution, and we just write Bismillah on the top of it, and it becomes Islamic. Right? Wouldn't that be a waste? Wouldn't that be a disaster? So that's the larger context when we look at this situation in the Middle East with Israel, and we look at how Muslims behave to these challenges. Ultimately, the success is going to come from Allah. But Allah promises that He's not going to change our position until we change what's in ourselves. So if we don't have Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in our heart, and instead we have democracy and secularism and this kind of human rights regime, if that's in our heart, that's what we're aiming for, that's our ideal, Allah's not going to change our position. Instead, He's going to oppress us with those things that we idealize instead of Islam. Muslims have idealized liberalism and secularism and democracy, etc., and women's rights. They have idealized it, many Muslims, in their hearts. So Allah is oppressing us with what we have idealized instead of Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is how things are connected. This is how the spiritual is connected to the cosmic situation that we find ourselves within. So this is very critical to understand. We have to change our internal state, and that goes hand in hand. I'm not saying just, okay, let's focus on prayer and forget about doing any kind of activity, any kind of push against these forces that want to exterminate us. No, we have to be active, but Are we neglecting the spiritual side? Are we neglecting what is in the heart? That's a question every Muslim has to ask himself. So that being said, just wanted to get that very clear to set the stage for the Mahmoud Khalil case. So what is significant about the Mahmoud Khalil case? And some Palestinians I saw on Twitter were annoyed, like, why do we care about this one person, like in America? And we're starving right now because Israel has blocked any aid, humanitarian aid, coming into the Gaza Strip. So it's been about 4 days, almost 5 days, where the Palestinians haven't gotten any supplies. They're starving. Let's not forget that. They're being starved to death. They have turned off the electricity. It's not like electricity was, free flowing in the Gaza Strip before. They had mostly blackout, maybe a few hours of electricity per day, but even that has been cut off. And we know historically Israel has not allowed Gaza to have its own power plant. The one power plant that they had was destroyed about 10 years ago. So Gaza is under siege currently. And so some Palestinians are wondering, well, why are you focusing on this one case? Mahmoud Khalil, who cares? What matters, what is critical, is that Israel is not able to do what it wants to do in terms of ethnically cleansing Gaza, ethnically cleansing the West Bank, or what they call Judea and Samaria, invading Syria, occupying southern Syria, invading southern Lebanon, attacking Yemen, possibly attacking Egypt in the Sinai as they push the Palestinians into the Sinai. They can't do all of that unless they get not only financial support, military support from the United States, and diplomatic cover from the United States in front of the international community. All of this is required for Israel to be able to do what it needs to do. Otherwise, Israel is very weak. Israel is weak in terms of being surrounded by hostile forces that are increasingly getting tired, increasingly tired of what Israel is doing. In terms of its aggressiveness and its brutality, and the populations within the Middle East, the Arab populations are just busting from the seams, basically, in wanting to do something about it, and it's their governments that are forcing or holding them back, basically. So Israel is in a precarious position without the support of the United States. But the support from the United States requires a certain level of public support. The U.S. population, the American people, have to, a certain extent, be on board with what Israel is doing. And if public support starts to wane, then that support from the United States also starts to wane, or it starts having caveats, or there starts to be a little bit of pullback. And we saw this with Biden. You could say that Biden was clearly a Zionist because Biden is just giving Israel what it wants in order to achieve this genocide for a year. But Biden was getting a lot of pushback from his Democratic base, from his liberal base, people who were very disturbed by what Israel was doing. And people who, prior to October 7th and the aftermath, were Zionists or they were pro-Israel, suddenly, after seeing the brutality through social media like TikTok, or maybe it was Elon Musk's X, they switched their positions. They were too shocked. And someone like Candace Owens is an example. Someone like Dan Bilzerian is an example. You could argue even Andrew Tate is an example. People who are either neutral with, or even they're pro-Zionist, pro-Israel. Because of what they saw on social media, they actually became pro-Palestinian and some of the biggest critics of Israel. And when those influencers are now critical of Israel, that creates a ripple effect. And then you have pressure coming to the White House, pressure coming to Congress, where Biden says, well, we're going to hold back on these 2,000-pound bombs because Israel is using these huge ordnance on residential areas, and it's causing indiscriminate death and destruction. And so we have to hold back the 2,000-pound bombs. That's what Biden, for example, did, or some of these Caterpillar bulldozers, armed bulldozer tanks. We're going to block the shipment of these bulldozers to Israel because we're worried about these humanitarian concerns. We're worried about the loss of life of Palestinians. Do you think Biden cares about Palestinian life? No, it's because of the political pressure. It's because of the political pressure coming from his base and coming from the wider public through social media, through TikTok. So Israel understands this as a problem. If they want to do what they want to do, which is ethnically cleanse Gaza, ethnically cleanse the West Bank, it's going to be very brutal. It's going to be very shocking. And we don't care about the international community as such. We don't care what they say about it in Japan or China or Brazil or Russia. We don't really care about that so much. We care about Europe to a certain degree. And we care about the United States. And the priority is the United States. Because if the United States starts getting sheepish, starts getting cold feet, then we can't go guns blazing, full blast, in order to quickly evacuate, quickly cleanse these areas and take the territory that we want to take. There's a time limit. There's a time limit. We have to do this quickly. Because if it's a sustained campaign, we're going to be losing a lot of Israeli soldiers, which we don't want. Israel, the population in Israel itself is getting tired of war. They're tired of seeing dead Israelis, Israeli soldiers. There's going to be more economic hardship because we're suffering not only because of international sanctions. Countries are no longer wanting to do business with Israel. They view us as genociders. But also we're getting blockaded through the Red Sea because of Yemen. So there's a time limit. We have to be able to have all the resources and all the weapons we need to quickly liquidate the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Those are the two priorities. And who's going to help us do that? It's going to be Donald Trump. But we have to make sure that the public support in America is on board with these plans. Otherwise, we can't do, like Project Hyperspeed. Hyperspeed ethnic cleansing. That's the logic of it. So when the Trump administration cracks down on campus protests, when the Trump administration cracks down on social media, for example, TikTok was banned. And it was offline for a few hours or maybe a day before Trump gets into office, and Trump worked out a deal to bring TikTok back, and he gets credit for bringing TikTok back. But in the new TikTok, the Trump TikTok, bans pro-Palestinian videos. And pro-Palestinian hashtags are not allowed to go viral anymore like they were prior to the ban. So this is a sanitized Zionist TikTok now that's available. So he clamps down on that. This is a critical part. Censorship, cracking down on the pro-Palestinian activism. This is a critical part of the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the West Bank and then the wider Middle East. Because it's not going to just stop with Gaza and the West Bank. It's going to expand to Syria, to Lebanon, to Egypt, to Jordan, and beyond. And Yemen and beyond. So this is why it's critical to look at what kind of tactics the Trump administration is resorting to in order to create censorship and create silence in the face of Israel's brutality and ethnic cleansing. So Mahmoud Khalil, what has led to his arrest, his detention by ICE? It was a multi-department coordination between not only ICE and Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, the Department of Education. They coordinated in order to arrest him. And his case is a test case. They basically want to be able to test the ability to deport or to strip residency status or visa status from these pro-Palestinian protesters. Because if they can do that, if they can legally do that and deport him, then they create this chilling effect where anyone who is not a full citizen is going to be very wary of being deported, and so they're not going to go out and be active against Israel on campus or anywhere else, on social media or anywhere else. So this is a test case. They are trying to find a legal argument in order to deport him. And the case of Mahmoud Khalil, we've seen precedent for this. We've seen precedents when it comes to the war on terror and how Muslims were targeted by the Bush administration, for example, and then later the Obama administration, in targeting the Muslim American community in order to stifle critique of the war on terror, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. Muslims have been subjected to these types of tactics, lawfare, legal means, in order to get Muslims in trouble, to silence Muslims, to scare Muslims so that they are not going to be as effective critics of U.S. foreign policy against the Muslim world. This is not something new. But the main targets, the main visible targets in the past were religious Muslims, like imams, or people who were pro-Islamist, or pro-Ikhwan, for example. Pro these different political or militant groups. They were the first targets. It's more religious conservative Muslims. Now, with someone like Mahmoud Khalil, Columbia grad student, from what I can tell, he's not really advocating for Islamic law. He's not advocating for Khilafah. He's not advocating. He's just a pro-Palestinian activist. Maybe he has some liberal ideas. I don't want to, I'm just speculating. I don't know for sure. But he's not your typical, stereotypical Islamist or imam or religious conservative. But now things have gone to a level where even someone like that can be targeted and kidnapped in the middle of the night and deported. So this is a shocking escalation. But Muslims, religious Muslims, conservative Muslims, we were suffering from this, targeted by this for decades, and we still are targeted by it. But now it's not enough. It's not enough. There needs to be more censorship. There needs to be more crackdown. There needs to be more keeping people in line so that the narrative, the dominant narrative, is 100% support of Israel. Give Israel whatever it needs in order to liquidate Palestine and then the wider Middle East to establish greater Israel. So what led up to the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil? Let's look at some of the details because they're relevant and they're interesting. So I just prepared some visual aid for you. So on January 29th, Trump signed an executive order to combat anti-Semitism vigorously using all available and appropriate legal tools to prosecute, remove, or otherwise hold to account the perpetrators of unlawful anti-Semitic harassment and violence. And before Trump came into office, this is what we were talking about. We had a Haqiqat show, for example, dedicated to the Esther Project. We talked about the Esther Project. We published an article on MuslimSkeptic.com written by Cryptocranium. Shout out to brother Cryptocranium, that detailed this Project Esther coming from the Heritage Foundation, describing how when Trump gets into office, we need to use the executive branch. This is Zionist talking. We need to use the executive branch and Trump's position as president to find any legal means to shut down protest against Israel. All of these, which they call pro-Hamas elements. The pro-Hamas elements, and they define pro-Hamas as anyone who is criticizing Israel. If you have a problem with what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, you are disturbed, shocked, and angered by seeing dead Palestinian children blown to bits by these huge bombs being dropped indiscriminately, or sometimes deliberately, on Palestinians in the most malicious way, if you have a problem with that, you are pro-Hamas. You are a pro-Hamas element, and you need to be neutralized according to Project Esther of the Heritage Foundation. And immediately, Trump takes office, and he signs an executive order to combat anti-Semitism, perfectly in line with what these Zionists had wanted and what we predicted would happen, given the fact that some of the biggest supporters of Trump in terms of campaign donations were Zionists, people like Miriam Edelson, giving over $100 million, other billionaires, Zionist billionaires, flooding Trump's campaign with endless money. So it was something very obvious that Trump was going to be this kind of Israel first president, and he didn't disappoint. Immediately on January 29th, he signs this executive order using all available and appropriate legal tools. So the law is like a tool. The law is a tool not for upholding justice, not for upholding, the rights of the people. No, it's a tool to remove the anti-Semites, which are the critics of Israel. This order, the executive order, reaffirms Executive Order 13899, signed by Trump in December 2019. So in 2019, Trump expanded Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and he expanded it to specifically target BDS, boycott, divestment, sanction, on college campuses by instructing those tasked with enforcing Title VI to consider the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, which happens to include criticism of Israel. So what does this mean? Why target BDS? BDS is like the bane of Israel's existence because it targets Israel financially, it targets Israel culturally. It creates a situation where Israel is isolated from the rest of the world, and they don't want this. They want to normalize, they want to benefit from economic ties, cultural ties with the rest of the world. And the BDS movement, led by the Palestinians, is this kind of peaceful way to isolate Israel from the rest of the world. And on college campuses, it gets really bad because colleges, many of the colleges have major endowments, multi-billion-dollar endowments that are invested in Israeli companies, in Zionist companies. And what students do on these campuses through student government is that they have a voice. They have a voice in directing the university in how that endowment can be used, how the endowment, what companies the endowment is invested in. And so a lot of student campus or student government on campuses advocate for ethical use or ethical investment. So we can't be invested in companies that are polluting the earth. We can't be as a university, our university can't be invested in companies that are perhaps involved in certain kind of smuggling within Africa or selling weapons to militants in different parts of the world. This is unethical investing, and we can't stand for it. So the university, we're going to pressure the university, or we're going to pass a resolution at the university to prevent the university from allowing these or having these kinds of investments. We talked about actually in the 2 episodes ago, we had Brother Ahmed from Propaganda & Co., and he talked about his history doing this for his campus in Florida. But with BDS specifically, now many major universities are divesting from Israel, and that means losses of potentially billions, tens of billions of dollars out of Zionist or actual Israeli companies and Zionist aligned companies. So this is a big threat. This is a big threat, and you're losing the shekels. You're losing the shekels, and this is very alarming to certain types of people. So there has been a massive effort to counteract BDS because they weren't winning. The first level of countering BDS was to empower the Zionist students on campus and the Jewish students on campus, like the campus Hillel or the Students for Israel, empowering them to go into these student government meetings and try to shut them down, basically, to prevent BDS resolutions passing, divestment resolutions from passing. That was the first level, but that had limited success. So then they escalated to the administration level. We have to crack down on BDS because it is creating a hostile environment for Jewish students, for Zionist students. So we have to shut them down on that level. That didn't work either, because many administrations were being activists on the other side, the pro-Palestinian activists, were an effective countermeasure to these Zionists. So then it gets escalated to the federal level, and Trump has to make an executive order to expand Title VI anti-discrimination and say, well, we have to accept the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. That's a part of discrimination. And if campuses are having this BDS, these resolutions, that is discrimination against the Jewish students on campus. This is illegal. And your university is going to lose funding. You're going to lose millions of dollars, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars in funding from the federal government because you're a discriminatory campus. You're creating a hostile environment. So that is the executive order that came through in the first term, Trump's first term back in 2019. So what is the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism? IHRA is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. This is just some made-up group, Zionist group, and they have a working definition. It's a working definition because it can be updated. It can be updated. It can be amended. Anti-Semitism is a evolving concept. And if you remember Candace Owens, her viral interview with a rabbi, and that interview went viral because Candace Owens kept insisting that, well, define anti-Semitism for me. Give me a definition, because when we talk about anti-black racism, there's a clear definition. When we talk about misogyny and discrimination against women, there's a clear definition. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's not really clear. I'm not really sure what this means. You're saying that criticism of Israel, where I say that I'm disturbed by the fact that Israel is murdering babies, you're saying that that's anti-Semitism. So what kind of definition is that? Give me a clear definition. Tell me where the line is so I know not to cross that line. And the rabbi kept saying over and over again, I can't give a definition because it's evolving. It's something that evolves. How convenient, right? How convenient that you have a definition of like the worst thing imaginable. Anti-Semitism is the worst thing possible. Like the worst people in history, which was Hitler, obviously. The worst people, Hitler and the Nazis, what made them the worst people was that they're anti-Semites. They were anti-Semites. So if you are accused of being an anti-Semite, then that means you're like equivalent to Hitler and the Nazis, the worst people by definition to ever have existed. And so what is this what is this quality that they had, that Hitler had, that the Nazis had, that they are anti-Semitic? Well, what does that exactly mean? Well, we can't define it. Well, we can't define it. We're just going to use it and apply it as necessary against our political opponents, critics of Israel. And that's what this working definition says, that it's a long list of things that count as anti-Semitic, and that includes denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. So if you criticize the history of Israel, you criticize Israel for the Nakba and displacing hundreds of thousands, 700,000 Arabs, slaughtering, massacring tens of thousands of Palestinians in order to create the state of Israel. If you talk about this, that makes you an anti-Semite according to the IHRA definition, working definition of anti-Semitism. If you compare what Israel is doing as a state to Nazi Germany, that is anti-Semitism. That is anti-Semitism. We can call you Nazis, but you can never call us Nazis. Okay, like those are the rules, guys. Those are the rules, and this is the working definition of anti-Semitism that Trump has made a part of federal policy, federal law, by expanding the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So then when Trump takes office, not only is he signing this executive order, he's also creating a task force to combat anti-Semitism headed by Leo Terrell, which has already opened investigations into nearly a dozen U.S. college campuses. And actually yesterday it was announced that it's been expanded to 60 campuses. 60 campuses are now under federal investigation by this task force to combat anti-Semitism. They're accused of creating a hostile environment for Jewish students because of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is allowed to run rampant on these campuses. What campuses are we talking about? There's a list of 60, and it includes universities like Harvard University, Princeton University, Stanford University. All the major state schools are included. So these campuses are now under threat of losing federal funding. And this is what happened with the Department of Education canceling $400 million in federal funding to Columbia University. And the reason for canceling $400 million is relentless violence, intimidation, and anti-Semitic harassment on campus, while affirming that additional cancellations are expected to follow. So maybe $400 million is just the beginning of the story. Relentless violence, intimidation, and anti-Semitic harassment. Like, okay, what is anti-Semitism? Well, here's our working definition. It means criticizing Israel. Criticizing Israeli policy, that's what anti-Semitism is. That is the federal policy. So, relentless intimidation. Imagine. So Columbia University has been the hub of these protests against Israel. They've created these encampments where they are just on the quad or in the middle of campus in a kind of a permanent demonstration. And this is the history, like squatting. This is the history of nonviolent protest on U.S. college campuses. So every major war that the U.S. is involved in, you have these kinds of protests. Going back to the Vietnam War, and then even the Gulf Wars, and now anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian encampments and protests as well in Columbia's campus. Harvard also had a big encampment right in Harvard Square, or Harvard Yard rather. So this is a big problem for the Zionists, and this is how they are shutting it down. Then this is the escalation. Now is the escalation. So not only did they cancel $400 million, so basically they want the universities themselves to crack down. They want the universities to crack down on Palestinian students and pro-Palestinian students and say, you cannot have a pro-Palestine student group. You cannot have pro-Palestine activities, let alone protests. You cannot, like, this is now contrary to school policy. You can protest any other country. You can protest any other government. You can even protest the U.S. government. No problem. That's part of your free speech. That's part of your free assembly. That is actually encouraged in a university environment of academic inquiry, free thought, resistance, activism. Those are values that at the university we encourage. We want our students to be activist leaders, especially, given the recent history with Black Lives Matter, protest movement, and so forth. We want our students to be leading against, oppression and leading against fascism and tyranny. We want our students to be out there, and we're proud of our students who will protest, even on campus. But now, we can't have it. Because if we allow these Palestinian or pro-Palestinian students to have a protest against Israel on campus, then we might have some Jewish students who come and report us to the federal government. Jewish students or Jewish professors, Jewish academics or Zionist academics will literally report us to this task force for anti-Semitism, task force against anti-Semitism, and the federal government will cut our funding. And we cannot operate without these millions of federal grant money that comes in. So they want the universities to crack down on these groups and these protesters. And it's yet to be seen. Already the universities are complying. Harvard already complied by forcing Claudine Gay, the previous president, the first female African-American president of Harvard University, they forced her essentially out. Why? Not because she was pro-Palestinian, not because she had a lot of things to say against Israel. No, her crime was that she didn't crack down hard enough. She didn't censor enough the pro-Palestinian students on campus. And that is equivalent to that is that is being a Nazi. Claudine Gay is a Nazi. And so she was deposed, she was thrown out. So already the universities, and this was 6 months ago, so already the universities are bending and updating their policies according to this pressure. But even that is not enough. Even that is not enough for the Zionists. It's not enough for the Trump administration controlled by these Zionists. They now are going to take matters into their own hands. They're saying that we are going to crack down ourselves, regardless of what the university does. And you have these students who are aligned with Hamas, okay? Aligned with. This is the language that they're using. Because someone like MAHMOUD Khalil, he has no ties to Hamas. He has no ties to any kind of foreign group. He's purely advocating from like a human rights basis against Israel's actions against the Palestinians. He has no ties to any of these groups. So the typical move that the U.S. government has used in the war on terror is to say that you are providing material support for terrorism. And they have a very broad and expansive definition of what counts as material support. So if you, for example, are cheerleading Hamas and you say, oh, Hamas is doing a great job, I'm pro-Hamas, this and that. If you say that, that is materially supporting Hamas because you're advocating for them. You are praising them, and that can be construed as inspiring others to support what is a designated terrorist organization in the United States. But aside the fact that Hamas is not a designated terrorist organization in 137 countries of the world or more, put aside that point, but in the United States, they're a designated terrorist organization. So if you even online say, oh, Hamas heart emoji, that can be argued in court as being material support for a terrorist organization, and therefore you can be arrested and you can be locked away for a very long time. And this is how they crack down on many Muslim Americans in post 9/11 in that war on terror period. And they established all of those precedents. But someone like MAHMOUD Khalil is not saying anything like that. He probably doesn't even like Hamas, arguably. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't, maybe, again, it's just speculation. Maybe he doesn't even like Hamas. He's just purely advocating for Palestinian rights. The Palestinian right to exist, the Palestinian right to resist their occupation, to resist their ethnic cleansing. That's probably all he's supporting, just like that's all we're supporting on MuslimSkeptic. But now the Trump administration is finding legal tools. Remember, that's what we talked about. Legal tools to prosecute even individuals who they are not actually, the government can't argue that they're materially supporting terrorism. The government is only arguing that they are aligned. They're aligned with these terror groups, which again is such a broad, expansive, and amorphous definition and license to kidnap and deport someone who was he is a legal resident of the United States. He's a green card holder, and he's married to a United States citizen, 8-month pregnant wife who is a United States citizen. So this is the legal precedent that they're trying to create with Mahmoud Khalil. And look at how they announce it. Shalom, Shalom Mahmoud. This is the official White House Twitter account. ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come, says President Donald J. Trump. He led activities aligned to Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. So that's what you can say about any protest. That's what you can say about anyone in America who advocates for Palestinians. They're aligned to Hamas. That's what you can say about MuslimSkeptic. You can say MuslimSkeptic is aligned because we are against the genocide of Palestinians. Like, this is how extreme it's become and how expansive it's become. This creates a precedent to crack down, brutal crackdown. So let's continue. This is a statement, press statement from Mahmoud Khalil's wife. I'm going to read it because it provides more details of how this arrest actually happened. It's quite disturbing. My husband, Mahmoud Khalil, is my rock. He is my home, and he is my happy place. I'm currently 8 months pregnant, and I could not imagine a better father for my child. We've been excitedly preparing to welcome our baby, and now Mahmoud has been ripped away from me for no reason at all. I'm pleading with the world to continue to speak up against his unjust and horrific detention by the Trump administration. This last week has been a nightmare. 6 days ago, an intense and targeted doxing campaign against Mahmoud began. Anti-Palestinian organizations were spreading false claims about my husband that were simply not based in reality. They were making threats against Mahmoud, and he was so concerned about his safety, and he emailed Columbia University on March 7th. In his email, he begged the university for legal support. Quote, I haven't been able to sleep, fearing that ICE or a dangerous individual might come to my home. I urgently need legal support, and I urge you to intervene, he said in his email. Columbia University never responded to that email. Interesting. Why didn't the university respond? We're going to see why in a second. Instead, on March 8th at around 8:30 p.m., as we were returning home from an iftar dinner, so they're coming back from iftar. This is an 8-month pregnant wife. Okay, 8 months, that means she's gotten pretty big. They're coming back from iftar, and an ICE officer followed us into our building and asked, "Are you Mahmoud Khalil?" Mahmoud stated, yes. The officer then proceeded to say, we are with the police. You have to come with us. The officer told Mahmoud to give me the apartment keys and that I could go upstairs. When I refused, afraid to leave my husband, the officer stated, I'll arrest you too. The officers later barricaded Mahmoud from me. We were not shown any warrant, and the ICE officers hung up the phone on our lawyer. When my husband attempted to give me his phone so I could speak with our lawyer, the officers got increasingly aggressive despite Mahmoud being fully cooperative. Everyone who knows Mahmoud knows him to be a level-headed, even in the most stressful situations, and even in this terrifying situation, he was calm. Within minutes, they had handcuffed Mahmoud, took him out into the street, and forced him into an unmarked car. Watching this play out in front of me was traumatizing. It felt like a scene from a movie I never signed up to watch. I was born. So imagine like this scene. This is terrifying. Like your husband is being forcefully detained. You're confused. There's no, what is the basis for this arrest? And there's an unmarked, handcuff being put in an unmarked car and taken away. Imagine the trauma from that. And it's really sad because she's pregnant, and anyone who is a parent knows that when your wife is pregnant, if she's stressed, the stress hormones go to the baby. And so that baby is affected also by this. This baby is already a victim by Trump and the the U.S. government and the Zionists. So this is very disturbing and disgusting, what they're doing to these Muslims. I was born and raised in the Midwest. My parents came here from Syria, carrying their stories of the oppressive regime there that made life unlivable. They believed living in the U.S. would bring a sense of safety and stability, but here I am, 40 years after my parents immigrated here, and just weeks before I'm due to give birth to our first child, and I feel more unsafe and unstable than I have in my entire life. U.S. immigration ripped my soul from me when they handcuffed my husband and forced him into an unmarked vehicle. Instead of putting together our nursery and washing baby clothes in anticipation of our first child, I'm left sitting in our apartment wondering when Mahmoud will get a chance to call me from a detention center. I demand the U.S. government release him, reinstate his green card, and bring him home. SubhanAllah, may Allah bring him back and destroy this effort, because it's very hard to read this, and I can't imagine what she's going through. But the comparison that she makes, I think, is very telling. She's saying that my parents moved from Syria. Okay, my parents are leaving a country where there is this oppression, brutality, tyranny against the population, against the Muslim population in Syria. You come to the West for a better life. You come to the West because you don't want to be disappeared. You don't want to be disappeared into a dungeon just because you have a certain opinion about some dictator. So you move to the West, and guess what? It's the same thing. The same exact situation. You have a wrong opinion about the people running this country, the true people who are running this country. Well, here's the unmarked van. Get in at 8:30 at night, coming back from iftar. So what's the difference really? Like, what is the difference between these dictatorial, authoritarian regimes in the Middle East that lack democracy and free speech and free thought versus the free West, the democratic, human rights respecting West, home of the free, land of the brave, or whatever it is? What's the difference? And this is the facade that we were talking about at the beginning of the show. This is all a facade. These values, the so-called rule-based order. And it's not something new. This is the history of the West. The West has always used the presumption of freedom and democracy as a tool to oppress, as a tool to stifle criticism, to stifle opposition, political opposition. From the very beginning, this has been what liberalism has been all about. It's just authoritarianism by a different name. Brutal repression by a different name. And this is what some liberals, and unfortunately Muslim liberals, they get confused on. Of course there's a difference. Democracy and equality. These are beautiful values. Of course that's different from authoritarianism. But that's not the case. That's not the case, because the legal tools that are used, these loopholes, or these, not even loopholes, this is the letter of the law, are being applied to create exactly that situation where you're cracking down on political dissent. Political opposition, it gets stifled, it gets censored, it gets eliminated. So what's the difference? What's the difference between what Bashar al-Assad or his father Hafez al-Assad was doing in Syria, brutally cracking down, censoring, preventing any kind of dissent, and what the United States does? What the United States has done its entire history, and more recently with the war on terror, and even more recently with these executive orders and the case of Mahmoud Khalil. So some interesting details from this case. The School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia, this is where Mahmoud Khalil was studying, and he graduated in December. But the thing about Columbia, as I mentioned, it has a history of anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian activism with faculty members who are very anti-Zionist, like Joseph Massad, Hamid Dabashi is another one. And there have been efforts from Zionists to infiltrate and take over Colombia. So what you may not have known is that the head of the School of International and Public Affairs, which MAHMOUD Khalil graduated from, Dr. Karen Yarhi Milo. Who is this? She is a former officer of the military, the Israeli military, specifically intelligence. So she is part of Israeli intelligence, and now she's the head of the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia. So literally, many of these schools, many of the Ivy League schools, their administration is packed with former Israeli intelligence, former IDF, and Columbia, or was it Harvard or Columbia? I think Columbia, just this past week, invited the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, to come and give a talk. And on campus, in his talk, he made a joke that he wants to give pagers to the pro-Palestinian activists. So you can make jokes like that, threatening essentially to kill the pro-Palestinian activists. That's not a hostile environment. That's not creating a hostile environment for Muslims or Palestinians or pro-Palestinian students when the former prime minister of Israel is literally threatening to kill you through pager. But if you protest 2,000-pound bombs being dropped on the head of Palestinian babies, or starving Palestinians to death by cutting off their food, electricity, humanitarian aid, you're an anti-Semite. You're an anti-Semite, and we're going to deport you. We're literally going to come at 8:30 p.m. at night and kidnap you, take you away from your pregnant wife. Another interesting fact that you may not have known is that 8% of all American college students have been involved in the pro-Palestinian protests since October 7th. 8%, that's a huge number. And when you realize that, you can see why Israel is freaked out. Why Israel is freaked out, and why Zionists in the U.S. are freaked out. So they have to fight this multi-front war. Not only are they fighting Palestinians in Gaza, increasingly in the West Bank, they also have to fight pro-Palestinians in the U.S. and the West in general, because 8% of American college students are going out and protesting and calling for the U.S. to divest, basically, and stop aiding Israel in its genocide. And the crackdown has been severe. There's been over 3,000 arrests, not only of students, but also faculty members, because a lot of these protests also have faculty members, administrators who join the protests against Israel. So this is a massive crackdown, and it's still not enough. It's still not enough. We have to have this legal precedent to strip activists of their residency status, like what they're doing to MAHMOUD Khalil. So there's multiple aspects of this case that we just want to get clear on. And I'll get to this, but first I want to look at super chats. Let's just take a break and look at the super chats before getting into legal dimension, because the legal dimension is important, and that's where we get to the hypocrisy of this so-called free liberal West. I want to see your super chats now, please. Ibrahim says, Assalamu alaikum, brother Daniel. Wa alaikum assalam. I would probably won't be able to watch this live since it would be Tarawih time here in France. My request to you is, can you list some good charities we could donate to for zakat or sadaqah? This is a perennial problem that we have. What are the trustworthy charities for zakat? I have this problem myself. I've had it. Like, I don't know which of these organizations you can trust. Sadly, the biggest organizations, I would not trust them with your zakat, because they have proven themselves over and over again to be corrupt, to misappropriate funds, to have massive overhead where they're paying themselves a huge percentage of the money that is coming in. They pay celebrity speakers to fundraise for them, and all of this exorbitant cost because they're flush with money. and they feel entitled to use that money as they wish, all under the umbrella of, oh, this is fi sabilillah, oh, this is zakat. So I would say my solution has been, Muslims who are needy, they themselves are below the level needed to give zakat. They're too impoverished, or they're in hard times where they themselves are not obligated to give zakat themselves. So they are, because of this poverty or hard times, they are a legitimate recipient of zakat. Give it to those people. Give it to people that you actually know personally. If you don't know them, seek them out. That is, I think, the best way to give zakat, to people that you actually know with your own hand. That's what I would recommend. I can't give a blanket recommendation, because even though I give donations to some organizations, can I vouch for them 100%? From what I can tell, they're trustworthy, but I've been so traumatized, you can say, by the corruption at some of these organizations that there's always some level of doubt. So the best, I think, and the most sure way to give your zakat and make sure it goes to needy people is to do it yourself. This is interesting. Can you do a show analyzing an academic article attacking you titled "A Crisis of Masculinity: The West Cultural Wars in the Emerging Muslim Manosphere" by Sahar Gomkhor? Yeah, that's a good idea. I'd like to analyze this kind of slop. So it's a good suggestion. Thanks for your super chat. Can you also do a show on an academic article, blah, 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 interfaith marriage in Islam, classical Islamic resources and contemporary debates on Muslim women's interfaith marriages? Yeah, that's another topic I'll look into. Can you talk about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and how that affects the Muslims? Some are saying this conflict could lead to World War III. I haven't heard any Muslims talking about it. When it comes to the conflict with Russia and Ukraine, it's good for Muslims. Like, it's good in terms of the Middle East, because if there are resources that are being directed to or against Russia, those are fewer resources that Israel can snatch for itself to kill Palestinians and to kill Syrians and Lebanese. So that's, from that level of analysis, as long as that conflict is raging, that's good news. What the Zionists are trying to do in the U.S. Are a certain faction of Zionists that are Israel aligned. They're more right-wing Zionists. They want Trump to create peace between Russia and Ukraine so that all resources can be redirected to Israel. That's their goal. But then you have another group of Zionists who consider Russia to be as much of a threat to the world's Jewish population as Palestinians and as Muslims. So they're not happy. They don't want Trump to drop the conflict. They want Trump to give more resources to Ukraine. They weren't happy with how Trump treated Zelensky. And these tend to be left-wing Democrat neocons. So this is... as far as Muslims are concerned, what would be best is if this conflict with Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, continues to draw attention and continues to draw resources from the West, so those resources aren't going to be used to kill Muslims. I mean, that's a cynical way to look at it, but that's the reality. Fiery says, most Americans don't know what a green card is. They don't know what you have to be convicted of a crime to be deported. Once Donald Trump knows this, he will do this more. Yeah, that's true. So they target people who are easier, like they're less relatable to the wider population. Like there are many of these anti-Israel activists who are white, American, born and raised here. So that wouldn't be a good first case in terms of the backlash. Go for someone who's brown. Go for someone who is not a citizen, who is a legal resident. So this is a good point you're bringing up. Trump is good destroying Western alliance in record time, better than a Thanos snap. Many are very upset at anything Trump. So this also transfers towards his disgusting Zionism and it has upon speaking to several Gen Z, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accept our fasting and forgive us. I mean, yeah, this is like the Trump effect. So when Trump supports something, there's going to be a backlash. And even with this deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, you have Democrats who have come out and said, who are otherwise Zionists, like these are card-carrying Zionists like Chuck Schumer, who are saying, I think you're going too far. I don't think we should be deporting people for having an opinion that's anti-Israel. I think this goes too far. Even Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, hardcore Zionist, has to come out and oppose Trump on this. So that's the positive thing about the Trump effect. When he goes hard pro-Zionist, it's going to generate a counter reaction. And we're going to talk more about those details in a minute. Brother SYA, thank you for big super chat. Really appreciate it. Again, how ironic seeing Palestinians preserve while Ukraine continues grifting for money. Years against USA/Israel, still Palestinians are strong. Also of note, per hadith, a Ramadan can have someone enter Jannah sooner than even a shaheed. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept ours. Ameen. Thank you. Good comment. Love from Queens, New York. May Allah preserve you. Ameen. Thank you, Shadman. That's very generous of you. How about the regular chat? Any comments before we move on? Ideally relevant comments. Oh, another super chat from Brother SYA. Was the Saudi Ramadan festival real? Astaghfirullah. I'm not sure. I posted about on X for those who are interested. SYA reminder, when a European atheist claims Islam is backwards, Europe always direct incest like in Netherlands, even animal-human debauchery like in Finland. Backwards. True. Good point. Faruqi says, our goal now is to unite Muslims. Give zakat to locals if you don't trust online donations. What's for iftar tonight? Gonna probably have some homemade rice and chicken, probably, with yogurt. That's a good meal. Maybe some vegetables. That's iftar, inshallah, if we live that long. My comment is that Muslims should move from the U.S. with all their money to Muslim countries. Yeah, good plan. Move to Muslim countries and then get kidnapped and put in a dungeon, and all your finances confiscated. That's a possibility, right? That can be a big possibility depending on what country, the Muslim country that you move to. Okay. All right, so let's move on. Keep the comments in the chat coming, and have the super chats coming as well. It really supports the show. our ability to do this show on a regular basis is dependent on super chats and your participation. So if you can't contribute anything, just be active in the chat. That helps the algorithm as well. Okay, so now let's go look at the legal basis for detaining Mahmoud Khalil and eventually wanting to deport him. And the bad news is it seems like they have the legal case. Like, there is a legal precedent for this. And so there has to be really some huge political backlash for them not to go through with this. Trump has made it very clear that he's ride or die for Israel, basically. He's a shameless prostitute for Israel. He's not even trying to hide it. Just recently, 2 days ago, he started attacking Thomas Massie. Thomas Massie is the U.S. congressman who went on Tucker Carlson and spilled the beans about AIPAC handlers. He said that every member of Congress, every senator and congressman has an AIPAC handler. And the AIPAC handler is like a designated person who makes sure that the congressman or the senator says the right thing about Israel and Palestine, votes the right way on any kind of bill or resolution. An AIPAC handler. And Thomas Massie said, I, of course, don't have any handler. I'm not funded by AIPAC. AIPAC every year spends $100 million on campaigning, giving campaign funds, lobbying. So Thomas Massie says, I'm not part of this. I disagree with this on Tucker Carlson. And now Donald Trump, the Zionists have been nonstop attacking him, threatening his family. And now Donald Trump comes out and says he wants to primary Thomas Massie. Basically, he's in Kentucky, get him out of office. Get some other kind of Zionist Republican to take his place. And there's been huge backlash against Donald Trump. Maybe Donald Trump didn't anticipate that it would be so unpopular to attack Thomas Massie, the only non-AIPAC funded, one of the few non-AIPAC funded congressmen. But that shows you the extent that Donald Trump is ready to throw his reputation in the trash and go against his base who love Thomas Massie. They love him for a variety of reasons. He's kind of a libertarian. He's like pro-gun. So he takes like pictures with his family. Like, he has many kids. So him and his wife, they're sitting in front of a big Christmas tree at their house. And they're all like holding these assault rifles, shotguns, assault rifles, ARs. So he has a big Republican conservative fan base that overlaps with Trump's fan base. And when Donald Trump comes after Thomas Massie, the Trump loyalists are angry about that because they side with Thomas Massie. So Donald Trump has proven himself to be willing to just throw his reputation into the dirt for the sake of Zionists. This is scary because it means that no matter the kind of backlash that he's going to get politically for deporting Mahmoud Khalil, he doesn't care about that. So the case against Colombia and what's happening in Colombia is twofold. There's the hostile environment claim that this violates Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. You are creating a hostile environment for Jews by criticizing Israel, by having these protests against Israel. This hostile environment is discrimination, so we're going to pull funding. Unless you have policies which crack down on these kinds of pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel activities. That's one level. But as we said, that doesn't go far enough for the Zionists. They want more. So now you have this idea of deporting someone and stripping them of their legal residency, like a green card status, stripping them of that because their views and their activities are contrary to national interest. This is the main legal argument that the Trump administration is invoking in their legal case, because a judge has delayed the deportation of Mahmoud Khalil. And so it has to go to trial. There has to be a court case. And this is what the Trump administration wants to argue, that they have a right to deport people whose activities or their views are contrary to the national interest of the United States. So a lot of people are spreading a mistaken analysis. They're saying that they're getting Mahmoud Khalil on material support, that Mahmoud Khalil has provided material support to a designated terrorist organization, namely Hamas, and this is why the government has a right to deport him. This is false. This is not correct. This is not the avenue that the Trump administration is pursuing. Number one, because it's not the case with Mahmoud Khalil himself. There's no evidence that he actually supported Hamas, praised Hamas, or did any kind of activity directly supported by or directed by Hamas. So it's going to be very hard or impossible to make that kind of claim that he is providing material support for a designated terrorist organization. So that's number one. The evidence just doesn't exist. But more importantly, the Trump administration wants to create a precedent that goes beyond material support because they want to target the activists who are not connected to Hamas or have not praised Hamas or have not, fallen into that material support category. This is an expansion of the executive power that Trump is trying to push through in service of Zionism. So that's the other reason that this is not about material support. Trump is not even in, because that legal precedent exists already. The material support precedent, like, oh, you praised Hamas or you praised this designated terrorist organization, therefore the federal government is justified, even for citizens, right? It doesn't matter if you're a non-citizen, even citizens, you are providing this material support. Therefore, we're going to put you in legal trouble. We can even, lock you away for over a decade. This counts as material support. That precedent legally was established a long time ago in the Bush era, post 9/11. So they don't need to reinvent the wheel. They want to create a new precedent on this basis of national interest. So let's look a little bit more closely at this. Mr. Rubio, so Mark Rubio, the Secretary of State of Donald Trump, also reposted a Homeland Security Department statement that accused Mr. Khalil of having led activities aligned to Hamas. Okay, not in support of Hamas, aligned. So just criticizing Israel for dropping 2,000-pound bombs on babies and starving babies and Palestinians to death, that is aligned with Hamas. But officials have not accused him of having any contact with the terrorist group, taking direction from it, or providing material support to it. Rather, the rationale is that the anti-Israel protests Mr. Khalil helped lead were anti-Semitic and fostered a hostile environment for Jewish students at Columbia. The people with knowledge of the matter said. Mr. Rubio's argument. So that's the first component. Those are things that concern Columbia University. Mr. Rubio's argument is that the United States has a foreign policy of combating anti-Semitism around the world, and that would undermine this policy objective to tolerate Mr. Khalil's continued presence in the United States. So just his presence is anti-Semitic, and that's going to strain the United States' relationship with Israel. And that is a sound legal basis to strip him of his residency and deport him because he hasn't committed a crime. And they're explicit about this. A White House official told the Free Press that the basis for targeting Khalil is being used as a blueprint for investigations against other students. This is the precedent that they're trying to create. Khalil is a threat to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States, said the official, noting that this calculation was the driving force behind the arrest. Quote, the allegation here is not that he was breaking the law. So he hasn't broken any laws. He's not being charged with anything. That's the crazy thing about it. So even if you follow the letter of the law under this rule-based order, the Superior West, with its freedom and equality, and laws that are based on a democratic process and the will of the people to send representatives to Washington in order to pass laws which are then approved by the president and signed into law, whether that's on the federal level or the state level or the local level, whatever, that system of laws, you don't even have to break any law. You don't even have to go contrary to all of these laws on the books. You don't even have to break a law. You're a perfectly law-abiding citizen. That does not prevent the government from kidnapping you, from disappearing you. That's the clear implication of what's happening to Mahmoud Khalil. The administration is not, so this is another statement, quote, the administration is not going to tolerate individuals having the privilege of studying in our country and then siding with pro-terrorist organizations that have killed Americans. Levitt said, we have a zero tolerance policy for siding with terrorists, period. So zero tolerance policy. So if you're opposed to Israel or you're critical of Israel, you're siding with terrorists. And we have a zero tolerance policy for that. So imagine. So this is even like they're starting with someone with a green card status, but this can easily be extended to even citizens. A senior State Department official told Fox News that Marco Rubio, found Khalil's presence and activities in the U.S. would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the U.S. and would compromise a compelling U.S. foreign policy interest, rendering him deportable under Section 237 of the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act. The official said Section 237 of the Immigration and Nationality Act broadly contains grounds for which an alien who is in the U.S. after having been admitted or having had his or her status adjusted to that of lawful permanent resident may be removed. So historically, this has been used when the U.S. has admitted a kind of political dissident. A political dissident who has sought sanctuary from another country. He's being persecuted in that country, and he comes to the U.S. for sanctuary. But the fact that that person is in the U.S., this causes problems, or this strains relations between the U.S. and that country. So in order to avoid straining relations, the Secretary of State decides that for national interest, we are going to extradite. And usually it's because of criminals or political dissidents, people who are considered to have violated the law in their home countries. So the U.S. basically decides we're going to revoke the visa that we gave or the residency that we gave. We're going to extradite or we're going to deport. So it's purely based on a political calculation, like the opinion of the Secretary of State. You know, the Secretary of State decides that, yeah, this is not in our interests. We're going to strain relations with Russia or China or Mexico or Canada. So we're going to extradite. That's how it's traditionally been used. But now they're expanding it because Mahmoud Khalil, it's not like there's any other country that's claiming him. There's no other country that's demanding he be extradited. The country that's demanding that he be punished is Israel. Israel is demanding that he be silenced and deported. And in order to not strain relations with Israel, this becomes a national security interest, foreign policy interest. Sometimes they say foreign policy, sometimes they say security. So we have to deport him. It's shocking. So just purely on the basis of what Israel wants. Israel doesn't like you. Israel doesn't like your activities. You're aligned with our enemies. Therefore, we're demanding that the White House deport you. This is crazy. So that's the legal basis. Now let's go back to the hostile environment component. The Department of Education is investigating 60 universities for possible anti-Semitic discrimination and harassment. So this has always been a way to shut down any kind of politically incorrect speech, any kind of politically incorrect research being done at universities. You don't say that we're going to shut down this research or this speech because we disagree with it. It's against our political interest. It's against the political interest of the state. They can't say that outright and explicitly. Or in the past, they haven't been able to say that. Now they're saying it. Now Marco Rubio is saying, yeah, this is against our national interests. Well, what does that even mean? Like, what is the national interest of the United States? Is the national interest of the United States to be a slave to Israel? Like, is the national interest of the United States to destroy its credibility on the world stage because you are funding and facilitating a genocide? Like, is that really in the national interest of the United States? And this is another big point. Like a bigger, broader point when it comes to how the United States has destroyed any semblance of being a rule-based order. Because when they do take these kinds of actions against the protesters, when they claim to be, we're all about free speech and democracy, but we're also going to crack down on anyone who criticizes Israel, and we're going to deport people, legal residents who criticize Israel, we're going to kidnap in the middle of the night in an unmarked van and take them away, disappear them, you come off as a hypocrite. America looks like the biggest hypocrite in the world. And it's one thing for the world to think that. It's one thing for non-Americans to have that opinion of the United States. But then the domestic population starts to have these thoughts. The domestic population starts to realize that, wow, this government that preaches freedom and equality and human rights and civil rights, they're willing to take that away at the drop of a hat on behest of some powerful group, whether that's Israel or pharmaceutical companies or different lobbies. So we don't have trust in the moral legitimacy of our government. Our government is a hypocritical government that abuses its power against the population. So there's an increasing level of dissatisfaction. The government loses its moral legitimacy. And when people are no longer trusting of their governments, then they are more likely to not comply with the laws of that government. They're more likely to dissent from that government. They're more likely to oppose that government or to organize against that government. And this creates instability. It creates all kinds of domestic problems. And eventually it leads to things like revolution and rebellion when things get violent. So that's why moral legitimacy is something very critical to the stability of Western nations. Western democratic nations, they need to maintain a semblance of moral legitimacy for the majority of the population. What percentage exactly? I don't know. That might vary. Does, 50%, at least 50% of the population has to view us as morally legitimate for us to have a stable situation. But what if it gets down to 40% or 30% or 20% or 10%? And as the economic situation gets worse and worse and people have to spend $400 when they want to shop at the grocery store for the week or the month, and they can't cover grocery costs. To buy one egg, to buy a dozen eggs, you have to pay $6, $7, $10. People are being strained, and they no longer have that kind of confidence in the government or the moral legitimacy of the government, especially as these kinds of double standards come to light, where you're cracking down on speech, you're cracking down on people's rights. And this creates a feedback loop. It creates a vicious cycle because the government is losing moral legitimacy, so people are less compliant. When they're less compliant, the government has to take even more heavy-handed means to crack down and get people to comply. And when they use heavy-handed means to get people to comply, that creates more dissatisfaction, that creates more doubt in the moral legitimacy of the state, which creates more non-compliance, which creates more dissent, which then precipitates more crackdown. So this becomes quickly a situation that is spiraling out of control. And we're seeing this. We're seeing, and this is why it's very bad news for Zionists. And they're not really, I don't know how, they're very out of touch. They're very out of touch with what these kinds of measures actually, the optics of them. The optics of detaining Mahmoud Khalil and deporting him, that's very bad optics, especially like he has a pregnant wife and he's coming back from iftar and he's a graduate student. He's graduating from Ivy League University at Columbia. It's very bad optic. And he has no connection to any, terrorist group. He doesn't have any, he hasn't advocated. He's like a very, as his wife said, he's very level-headed. He's very respectable. Clean record, no criminal record. And this is who the federal government, Donald Trump, is targeting. And then you announce it with Shalom. Shalom, Mahmoud. What the optics of that are shocking. It's like very bad optics. You're going to create more political dissent and you're going to create more animosity towards the chosen people. Like are you not aware of that? Like, is the person in the White House who's writing these tweets, like their social media manager, not aware that this is going to backfire? So yeah, this is things escalate. So you go to university and you want to criticize feminism? No, you can't criticize feminism. That creates a hostile environment for women. That triggers women who are suffering from abuse or domestic violence, or they have a history of being mistreated by men. Therefore, you can't criticize feminism. You can't criticize LGBT for the same reason. That creates a hostile environment. That's discriminatory. You're free to talk about whatever you want, to criticize any ideas you want. It's a free academic environment. That's what distinguishes us in the West, the free West, from these backwards, repressive countries in the Middle East and in China and in Russia and in Africa and so forth. We are the free, enlightened West. You can talk about any ideas, question any religious dogma that you want. But we don't allow you to engage in discrimination. So you cannot criticize feminism. You cannot criticize LGBT. You cannot criticize critical race theory. And now you cannot criticize Zionism. You're creating discrimination. This is hostile environment. So this is a joke. This is a facade. Furthermore, you can criticize men as a gender, no problem. You criticize men. All men are basically rapists. We know that, according to feminism. Heterosexuality, heteronormativity. We know heteronormativity is the greatest force of oppression in the world. We have to criticize that. Europeans in general. The white race and white privilege, we have to criticize that. That's fine. That's not creating a hostile environment. And then when you point out this double standard, you have the liberals who are saying, no. But the difference between criticizing men as a gender versus criticizing women as a gender is that men have power. They have power, therefore they are legitimate targets of our critique. Well, do Zionists have power? Are Zionists powerful or not? Like, it's like Schrodinger's Zionist. Not only do you have all this power, you're also the biggest victim. How does that work? So that's point number one. Point number two, you have all kinds of criticism for Muslims. You have all kinds of criticisms for Islam. How many courses are there that are critical of Islam? Orientalist courses that are attacking Islam as a religion, courses that are attacking political Islam, the idea of Islamism as being an attack on freedom and equality. I went to Harvard. Many courses are dedicated to undermining traditional Islam, conservative Islam, political Islam. like the standard Islam courses. And you go to these departments, you go to, the NELC department, or you go to the Middle Eastern Studies department, they're anti-Islamism, they're anti-conservative Islam, they're pro-reforming Islam. And then you have many campuses also criticizing Muslims, but none of that creates a hostile environment. And by the way, many of these anti-Islamic classes and programs in universities are led by Zionists. It's Zionists and Jewish professors who are promoting this kind of critique of political Islam or Islam as a whole. And that's something that I also experienced at Harvard. That was the most hostile environment for Muslims on Harvard's campus 20 years ago. I remember one incident very vividly. They were republishing the Danish cartoons. So there was a campus publication, the Harvard Salient is the name. It was more right-wing, neocon type of publication. Had a lot of Zionists and Jews involved with, this kind of neocon publication on campus. And they wanted to take a stand for free speech. We are not going to be silenced by political correctness. And these terrorists are threatening us, or they're threatening these Danish cartoons of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they had cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam being published as a free speech statement. And Harvard, this campus group, wanted to republish those cartoons to show how dedicated they are to free speech. And the Muslims on campus were protesting this. And Muslims were telling the administration, this is unacceptable. This is an attack on our religion. This is an attack on Muslims. This is creating a hostile environment. That's the kind of argument that was being made by the Muslims. And what did the Harvard administration say to the Muslims? Sorry, I guess you gotta grow a thicker skin. I guess you gotta, put on your big boy pants. This is the world. We're a university. We're not an Islamic university. We're Harvard University. So we can't really censor anyone on the basis of your feelings. That's literally what the dean of the university said. And the dean happened to be Jewish. That's just a coincidence. But that's what they told the Muslim students on campus. And so the cartoons were published. And then there was an email that was leaked from the dean. So the dean had, and she was a woman, she was a Jewish woman. She had emailed the Harvard Salient and said that, we're not going to stop you from publishing this, but be careful. We're going to provide you some security, but be careful because certain elements on campus might get violent. So not only are they not supporting the Muslims, they're feeding into this idea that Muslims are these crazed terrorists that are just going to come and chop off your head if you publish these cartoons. So, yeah, that's not a hostile environment at Harvard for Muslims. That's not hostility, where literally the administration is involved and colluding with these neocons. Yeah, so now when we see someone like Mahmoud Khalil, not only is he being repressed by Columbia University, as we saw, the head of the school which he graduated from is literally a IDF intelligence officer at Columbia. So they're not helping him. The university is not helping him. Not only that, but the university is collaborating with the NYPD, with the New York Mayor's office, with ICE, with DHS, with the DOJ, with the Secretary of State to put down your protests, but they're also now going to deport you because you created a hostile environment for our students of a particular race and political ideology. It's so outrageous, the double standard. And again, the double standard is more egregious by the fact that the people who are pushing anti-Islam, anti-Muslim narratives on campus, the number one pushers of that are Zionists themselves. You have every year a whole week dedicated to Israel on every campus that's so well funded. They might call it Israel Independence Celebrations, Israel Week. And the Jewish students and the Hillel and the Israel Campus Organization, they put on all these events. They bring IDF soldiers. They bring former Israeli politicians to campus to talk about how amazing and beautiful Israel is, how we need to give nonstop support to Israel. And when you go to their events, it's so much anti-Muslim messaging. And they literally will give out brochures. And this was the case when I was an undergrad, and maybe 10 years after. I don't know if it's still the case. But they give brochures and they say, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel is the only democracy, is the only country where we respect women's rights. And then they have a picture of a Muslim woman in a hijab and niqab, and she's standing next to like an Israeli woman in a bikini on the beach. And, oh, look, we have so much freedom in Israel, but not in these terrorist countries, not the rest of the Middle East. That's why you have to support Israel. That's why the values that you have as a college student, as a liberal college student, are aligned with Israel, not with Muslims, not with Islam, not with the Arabs, not with the Palestinians, not with these countries. That kind of programming is multi-million-dollar funded programming, publishing, distribution on college campuses, nonstop. No one has claimed, or no one has successfully shut these things down on the argument that this creates discrimination. This creates a hostile environment for Muslims or Arabs or Palestinians. And this is the hypocrisy, the myth of freedom of thought in Western academia. Oh, the bastion of free thought and free inquiry is the Western University, maybe the Ivy League, Columbia, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford. But there's so many mechanisms that are put in place to prevent that. And we already talked about federal funding. The government decides, well, this is violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. We're taking away millions of dollars in federal funding. That's one way that the government cracks down on politically incorrect speech, politically incorrect thought. But then hiring and tenure. So if you know how universities get professors, there's a hiring process. You have to, first of all, have a PhD. You can't even have a PhD from a credible university if you have a habit of engaging in politically incorrect speech, or your research is dedicated to something that's politically incorrect, contrary to the political interest of the state. You're not even going to get a PhD. You think you can go to Harvard and write about how Islamism and the Sharia is more rational and more moral than secular democracy? You think you can write that dissertation? You think that you will be able to get a PhD on that topic? Oh, but what if you have the most brilliant argument and the most well-cited dissertation, and you just pass you pass with flying colors, so you have all the merit in the world, but you think then that will be acceptable? No way. No way. You're not going to be able to. Certain ideas cannot be pursued as research within this environment, within these universities. So you're not even going to get a PhD, but assume that you did get a PhD and now you're applying for a position to be a professor, an assistant professor or associate professor, and they say, well, we like your research, or we like the work that you've done, but we see from your social media activity that you have been active in advocating for these politically incorrect causes. Or you have these politically incorrect views. You said something about Israel. You said something about LGBT. You said something about women's rights. Sorry, you're not the kind of candidate that we want. We don't want to bring someone like you to teach our students where you're going to get us in trouble with our board of trustees or with our donors, our outside funders. So yeah, we pass on that resume, pass on that CV. And then tenure. Even if you are a good little boy for your PhD and you get hired and you're in a department and you're a good little boy, you don't touch any political topic with a 10-foot pole, let alone do research on any politically incorrect topic. You don't even touch on anything outside of a work context, research context. You've been just very neutral, and maybe even you've gone out of your way to praise liberal causes and to show your loyalty. That's not enough. That's not enough, because when tenure comes up, they're going to investigate even more closely. Maybe your research isn't politically incorrect, but it could be construed as such, and we just don't want to take the risk by giving you tenure. For those of you who don't know what tenure means, it means that you get a permanent position. I mean, it's not actually permanent because you could still be fired from tenure. That's something that people don't recognize. But you'll get a permanent, semi-permanent position on the faculty, and the university is not going to cancel your contract unless there are some extenuating circumstances. For example, you engage in discrimination. If you engage in discrimination, then they reserve the right to actually cancel your tenure as well. So there is but the idea of tenure, the whole idea in this kind of myth of freedom, academic freedom, is that when a professor gets tenure, then he can really be free to explore whatever topic without any worry about reprisal or losing your job and not having something, not being able to make a salary. Because you have a permanent position, the salary is guaranteed, the university is going to be paying you. So you can really spread your wings and explore. And that's when you can do your most incisive research, because you don't fear any kind of backlash or reprisal. But there's fine print. And the fine print says that as long as you don't engage in discrimination. If you engage in discrimination, then your contract actually can be canceled. You can lose tenure. So that's how you have free speech that's not actually free. Free academic thought that's not actually free. Administrators, that's the second point. As we saw, you can have administrators who are literally Israeli intelligence officers that are going to prevent you from advancing in academia, advancing in your career. You also have outside funders. You have many of these Zionist billionaires donating hundreds of millions of dollars to these universities, and they say, well, actually, don't give tenure to such and such professor, otherwise I'm going to pull my funding. With Columbia and a lot of these other universities like Harvard, this has happened. Zionists said that, well, you're not shutting down these protests on campus, we're pulling our hundreds of millions of dollars. That's the other way that they control speech and thought on campus, and federal funding, which we discussed. So if you're interested in these kinds of arguments and you want to go into more depth, we have a course on Elesna. If you don't know what elesna.org, the URL is down there at the bottom. We have an institute, a learning institute, where we have courses organized that you can take on liberalism, feminism, secularism. And one of our courses is liberal mind control. And it's a very popular course. People really like it. It goes into great depth on how there is this facade of freedom and democracy to conceal the authoritarianism that is part and parcel of liberalism, liberal freedom and democracy. So take that course if you're interested. Another important background piece of information is anti-BDS laws. So I mentioned boycott, divestment, sanction, and how this is such a big threat in isolating Israel and causing financial liabilities for Israel. 38 U.S. states out of 50 have passed bills and executive orders designed to discourage boycotts of Israel. Most anti-BDS laws are in two forms: either contract-focused laws requiring government contractors to promise that they're not boycotting Israel, or investment-focused laws mandating public investment funds to avoid entities boycotting Israel. So this is another example of how the legal tools used to prevent free speech criticism of Israel and your right to even boycott. You don't even have a right necessarily to say, I'm boycotting Israel. Israel is committing atrocities. I can't support them with my money. The government at the state level is saying, no, you don't have the right. You don't have the right to boycott Israel. You have to do business with Israel. Otherwise, that's anti-Semitism, according to our working definition of anti-Semitism. And there are many examples that came to light, covered by mainstream media. The BBC was reporting, Texas City requires Israel pledge for hurricane relief. So this is Texas. Hurricane Harvey, you had many people who needed aid and relief because their lives were destroyed. And Texas was requiring, these are common people, to sign these contracts in order to get the relief or to get the aid. And one of the clauses within that contract said that you pledge not to boycott Israel. If you want aid, okay, your whole house has been destroyed by a hurricane. Your livelihood has been destroyed. If you want aid from the government, you have to pledge not to boycott Israel. You have to have a stance where you're open and willing to do business with Israel. So imagine like no other group gets this kind of law, right? You can boycott Iran, you can boycott Turkey, you can boycott Russia, you can boycott China, you can boycott the United States, you can boycott Canada, you can boycott Mexico, but only one country you are not allowed to boycott. So, and then there was this case, a Texas elementary school speech pathologist. She was a Muslim speech pathologist working with little children, refused to sign a pro-Israel oath, now mandatory in many states, so she lost her job. A major attack on the First Amendment. No credible advocate of free expression can remain silent about this free speech exception for Israel. So again, her employment contract with the school. So the school is a state institution, and they have to have this clause. You will not boycott. I pledge not to boycott Israel. If you don't, that's a part of the contract. So if you want to get the job and be a contractor for the state at like a school institution or sanitation or any kind of contract that you want to win from the government, you have to sign and pledge that you will never boycott Israel. This is, and the thing is that these were supposed to be challenged in court because this is from 2018, 2019. It's been 5-6 years and it's still in the courts. It's still in the courts. It's still being challenged. So this is what Zionists do. It's lawfare. Now that ceasefire is ending, Israel is preparing airstrikes against Iran, so we need wartime martial law and censorship. If there were popular dissatisfaction, there would be U.S. pullback from full support. So this is what I mentioned earlier. The fuller context, Israel is wanting to escalate, accelerate. They want to finish the job, and in order to do that, they need full U.S. backing. If there's any hesitation from the U.S., that is going to threaten the success of their overall mission for establishing Greater Israel. Therefore, there needs to be crackdowns in the U.S. at the federal level, and this is what they're doing. This is the significance of the Mahmoud Khalil case. So, and again, this is not something new. This is exactly what they did against religious conservative Muslims after 9/11. They used deportation of American imams, and they found some kind of legal excuse. They said, "Oh, well, you were filling out these forms to gain your green card, but this wasn't exactly accurate in those forms. So based on that technicality, we're going to deport you. We're going to take away your green card and deport you." That's what happened to many American imams, being put on a no-fly list. You can't travel. Surveillance in masajid, in mosques. There was surveillance through spies that were coming to masajid to document and record the khutbah, the classes, the activities of different masjid members, shutting down charities. So many Muslim charities were shut down and the organizers of those charities were put in prison. Sami al-Arian is a good example. He was put in prison. Why? Because he was accused of material support for terrorism, because his charity was accused of funneling money to Palestinian resistance groups. So, and then entrapment, of course, is another method where they will go and say things like an agent will say, you know, brother, you're not like the rest of these guys in the masjid. I can tell that you're smart and you are really on the deen. And isn't it terrible what the United States is doing? I think we need to do something about it. We need to do something about it. Let's go to the gun range, and practice for an operation, something like that. And then this usually they target someone who is mentally handicapped, or sometimes they target just naive brothers. And so you go to the gun range, and then they give you a gun, but that gun, you don't legally own that gun. It's not your gun, but you'll still be charged with illegal possession of a firearm. So they've extended the law specifically to entrap Muslims, because usually illegal possession of a firearm assumes that you own it. Like you've acquired a firearm illegally without proper registration or whatever, and you have it in your possession, which means it's in your house, or you're keeping it in your car or in your house. That's possession. But they extended that for Muslims specifically, that even if you hold it, you're just holding it because you're at a gun range, that's illegal possession of a firearm. So this is, again, legal tools bending the law or even violating the law in court in order to punish Muslims, to crack down on them, to create a culture of silence. And that really destroyed, in a lot of ways, the American Muslim community. Like, the American Muslim community has not recovered from these tactics used by the American government. When you look at these compassionate imams and you look at the sorry state of American Muslims, it's partly due to these kinds of crackdowns. Because a lot of the legitimate leaders, a lot of the legitimate imams who did have politically incorrect views, they were crushed. They were detained. They were put on no-fly lists. They were deported. And the people who remained were the ones who made deals, or they collaborated, or they stayed silent, or they learned how to basically talk in a way that liberals approve of, that the state approves of. And it's been a disaster. We're suffering from this disaster to this day. So that's what I wanted to present to you. There's one other thing. We have to talk about the Madkhalis, of course. The Madkhali Wahhabis. This Khabith Shaitan Amjad Taha says, no Muslim or Arab country wants Mahmoud Khalil, an anti-Semitic, racist Hamas sympathizer. He roamed Hezbollah's terror hubs in Beirut before infiltrating Colombia, not to learn but to radicalize. His mission is to hijack students' minds, turning them from seekers of knowledge into Hamas propaganda pawns, useful idiots destined to become either human shields or mouthpieces for Islamist extremism. Democrats demand his release not out of principle but out of political desperation. With nothing else to sell, they latched onto this trend, pretending to champion youth empowerment. Hundreds of these so-called activists are academic failures, culture-hating misfits, and naive fools with no grasp of the ideology they endorse. So that's weird. He's going after Democrats. Allowing Mahmoud Khalil back into universities is no different from welcoming ISIS and AQ. The only difference is he knows the PR playbook. Shave the beard, play the victim when caught, and let the useful idiots do the rest. Don't you hate the Madkhalis more than anything? Don't you hate these Madkhali Wahhabis more than anything? So, never miss an opportunity to stab Muslims in the back. So, yeah, this is who's Amjad Taha. He's from the UAE. In the UAE, and we've covered this many times about how the UAE is trying to control English-speaking Islam because they view it as a threat to their secularization project. So go to the episodes that we've had on Madkhalis and Wahhabis, and you can get that presentation, inshallah, if you're interested. Okay, any super chats, make sure to send them in now. I'm also going to look at the regular chat. White supremacists are using hate for Israel to push their racism. They're only against Israel because they don't want to see Jews compete against their ethno-state plan. They're really pro-genocide. Yeah, some of them, not all of them. Some of them have a principled opposition to genocide. So you can't really... I mean, it depends on what you mean by who you're referring to as a white supremacist. That's a question. Let's see. Shadman says, why don't you promote a caliphate? Tired of these libs. Yeah, why don't I? I've never promoted a caliphate, ever. Thanks for the suggestion. Good idea, brother. Punjabi Muslim History says, check your email. Okay, inshallah. Let's do that. Why are these low IQ Wahhabis in the chat? Like, is there any group stupider than these people? So I'm always shocked by how dumb they are. Alright guys, I'm not seeing any relevant comments. Thank you for paying attention and hope you benefited from the presentation. Again, I think this is a critical time for the Ummah. We really need to wake Muslims up to the reality of the free democratic West. There really shouldn't be any Muslims who are advocating these ideals as opposed to Islamic ideals of Sharia, Khilafah, obedience to Allah and His Messenger, Muslim unity, Ummah first. We are one Ummah. We have to look at the interests of the Ummah. Pan-Islamism. These are the values that we have to be advocating, especially in these hard times, because that's the solution. You know, that's the solution for so many of the problems that the Ummah is facing. It's really backwards and idiotic to think that, oh, well, we can continue with a world that's dominated by U.S. liberalism, U.S.-Israeli liberalism, and things are just going to be fine. We're going to be able to make it. And that myth was shattered, you know, in the war on terror. And if any remnants remain, they were shattered post October 7th. There's no question or doubt about that. So the people who are still advocating for that kind of global order under liberalism, they are either agents or they're too stupid to have any comment or have any thought to be expressed publicly. They should just be told to shut up. You know, just shut up. You're too stupid. You're either a traitor or you're completely ignorant, and therefore you shouldn't be speaking. You shouldn't be talking to Muslims. You shouldn't be on the minbar. Just no more tolerance in terms of hearing from liberals and secularists. There's no more excuse for being a liberal, a Muslim liberal or Muslim secularist. That's the ultimate message that I have in this episode. All right, guys. Jazakallah khairan for all of your super chats as well. I really appreciate it. Some big super chats were sent, and that's always appreciated. Support Muslim Skeptic this Ramadan. Obviously, it's the month of a lot of blessing. So if you want to give charity, sadaqah, you can always support our mission at Muslim Skeptic. Go to MuslimSkeptic.com, and the top right is the donate button. And any donation that you can make is very much appreciated. Your generosity is very much appreciated if you want to have ongoing support for Muslim Skeptic, because we have ongoing costs. You'd be surprised at how expensive things are. Any kind of support that you can give on an ongoing basis. Can you donate $5 a month? Can you donate $10 a month? That's the cost of a dozen eggs at this point. That's the cost of a dozen eggs. You used to say that, it's a cost of like a cup of coffee. Now we're saying it's the cost of a dozen eggs per month. That helps that helps our cause a lot. So may Allah bless you all. May Allah accept your fasting and your worship this month. And we'll have more episodes of Haqiqatjou coming up within a week, inshallah. So stay tuned for that and subscribe to the channel. And we'll catch you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.